Hello everybody, today we're taking a look at the Hobbymate Speed 86 AC/DC Smart Charger. So this is everything you get in the box. You get the charger itself, an AC power cord, and a specification sheet. So let's take a look at the specifications real quick. The input voltage is on AC is from 100 to 240 volts. On DC is from 6.5 to 30 volts. DC charge power is 700 watts. That's if you have an input voltage of greater than 24 volts. It's about 325 watts if you have an input voltage less than 24 volts. It has an AC charge power of 200 watts. It has a regenerative discharge capability of 700 watts, an internal discharge capability of 30 watts, an external discharge of 700 watts. We'll talk about the difference between regenerative and discharge and external discharge. And it charges all the common battery chemistries. So let's take a look around the charger itself. So on the front you have a screen and some buttons. On the back you have your AC input, your DC input, a USB port for updating the firmware, and a multifunction port. This is for testing servos and receivers. On the left side, you have your output port, your balance plug, and a USB port for charging up to 2.1 amps. The other side, you have the cooling fan. There's the back. All right, so let's get this powered up. Okay, first let's go into the system menu. Long press on the button. And then we can go into system parameters. We got language, regenerative discharge. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Max input power, min input voltage, LCD backlight, volume. Let's go into volume. Let's turn that off because I'll be pressing a lot of buttons during this review. We have the completion signal, whether it repeats or not, or that's at the end of the charge, and the device name. Go back. And if we want to go back to the main screen, let's start off by hooking up a battery. Main lead goes right there. Balance port. The ground side goes closest to the main lead. Like that. This is a 1300 milliamp hour 4S. You can see here it gives all the individual cell voltages, the total pack voltage. So short press. We'll go into different kinds of, what are we going to do? But obviously we're going to charge. There's other options here like we talked about. We have power supply. We'll go over this later. We have charge, discharge, external discharge, storage, balance, regenerative discharge. So we're going to go to charge here. We have, this is a light bulb, but we'll look real quick here. It has all the lithium technologies, nickel, lead acid, and a loop. I think it has smart battery at the top there. So this is a LiPo. Cell voltage. This is the, it's 4.2 volts per cell is the correct charging voltage for LiPos. Cell count auto detects because I have the balance port plugged in, but you could change that if you didn't have a balance port, or if you didn't have a balance lead on your battery. Charge current. Now this goes all the way up to 26 amps. So it's limited to 26 amps. And so on DC, if you were to have like we talked about during the specifications, if you have it plugged in via DC only and you had a power supply greater than 24 volts, you can go all the way up to 26 amps or 700 watts, whichever one you hit first. And then if you have about, a less than 24 volt power supply, you're going to be limited to 325 watts. So we'll go back to 1C. On this battery, this 1300 milliamp hour, it's 1.3 amps. So we'll hit start. You'll see the voltage start to increase. Here we are at 1C current. One of the things about this charger, it has an advanced balancing circuit in it. So if your battery was slightly imbalanced, it'll actually balance it faster than other chargers because of that advanced circuit. So after about a minute, you can press the down arrow here and it will show you the internal resistance of your cells. So this is essentially, I use this as kind of like a health meter for my pack. The lower the number here, the better. It's somewhat relative from pack to pack. So I like to kind of note, what these values are when a pack is new, and then I'll see how they change over time. But expect those numbers to get larger over time, and that's as your pack gets more worn and it's essentially becoming a lower C. It's effectively a measure of the C rating. So we can go back here, and this will continue to charge until the cell voltages read 4.2 volts. So we won't wait for all that, so you can press the center button here. And you could adjust the current if you wanted to during the charge cycle. Change it a little bit. And go up to 1.5, and then we'll just stop it. Okay, I want to give you an idea of what 200 watts look like at charging at 1C. So these are 1300 milliamp hour 4S packs. I got them hooked up through two different balancing charging plates. Essentially, when you parallel charge, you want to make sure that your cell voltages on individual packs are fairly close to each other. I typically like it to be within 0.1 or so volts, all matched, all similar for all the different batteries I'm parallel charging together. Overall voltage on 4S, that would be within about 0.3 volts. And then, of course, when you're charging, you can't mix 2S with 3S or 3S with 4S. They all gotta have to be the same types of battery chemistry and the same number of cell counts. So right now, this is 7 1300 milliamp hour packs charging at 1C, which is 1.3 times 7 is 9.1 amps. And currently, that's only 142 watts. I had two more I just don't have that many 1300 milliamp hour packs. This is all I have. And so, but two more 1300 milliamp hour packs would be about 200 watts. So that's 9 batteries charging all at once, 200 watts. So 200 watts is more than you might think. So then we say, okay, well, that's the AC capability. Now we go to DC. The DC capability, if you had something less than a 24 volt power supply, would be 325 watts. So for 325 watts, this 9 batteries turns into 15 batteries. And then with a power supply greater than 24 volts, or at 24 volts or greater, then that's 700 watts, or current limited to 26 amps. And this 9 batteries for AC turns into 20 batteries. So I'm absolutely amazed of how much power can come out of a charger this size. So now let's talk about discharging. So let's say you're at the field, you didn't end up flying all your batteries, so now you need to discharge them back down to the storage voltage. You're not supposed to leave LiPos charged fully charged more than a couple days. So there's multiple ways to use this charger to discharge batteries. Let's plug in the main lead and the balance lead. And then we'll do a short press. We'll select. We have two different options here. We have multiple different discharge options. So essentially, I want to use the storage function here. It's the same as the discharge function, essentially, but this one's already preset to go down to a certain volts per cell. So let's go in here, and we are going to select LiPo batteries. It would be 3.8 volts per cell. This is a 4S. And I go ahead and just leave the current setting set out, pretty high value, because essentially it's going to be limited by the internal capability of the charger to discharge the battery. So I'll go ahead and keep it on 5 amps here, and select start. So what's going to happen here is going to start discharging the battery. It's also going to make sure the cells stay balanced. You see here, it is discharging at a rate of 35 watts. You hear the internal fan kick on. It's because it's turning that energy into heat. So it'll continue to discharge until these voltages right here, the cell voltages, read 3.80 volts. So that's one way to discharge. But 35 watts is very respectable for a charger's internal capability. Most chargers, even the best ones, only max out at about 15 watts. The fact that this one does 35 is impressive. So we can go ahead and stop this, and I'll show you the other ways to discharge. All right, so let's disconnect the battery. Because what I want to do here is, let's say I'm going to power this off of a larger battery. Let's say that I was at the field and I had used this battery to charge multiple smaller batteries, and this one is now somewhat depleted and all my smaller batteries are full, and I need to send, ideally I can conserve energy by putting the energy from this battery back into this battery, and that's called regenerative discharge. So again, we'll plug it in. And one thing we want to do here, though, we want to go into the setup menu and make sure it's set up correctly. So we'll go into system parameters and we'll go into regen discharge. So essentially, when you're thinking about it this way, I'm using this battery to charge this battery, but I don't want to charge this battery too fast, so maybe I will think about discharging this one to this one at 1C of the main battery, the source battery. So that for 1C would be 6 amps, and I don't want to charge this too much. So I want to set the max voltage at the max voltage for this is a 4S pack, 16.8 volts, and the max power at 200 watts is fine, 250 watts. So I can go back here. All right, so now, short press, go into regen discharge, 6 amps, and that's it. So now we'll see, go ahead and start that task. So now it's transferring the energy from this pack to this pack. It'll stop. We won't go over 16.8 volts. It's going to go up to 6 amps. So it's doing it much faster. Before we were discharging it a little bit over an amp. Now we're discharging at 6 amps. And you can see that the milliamp hours coming out of this pack and go to this pack, it's happening much faster. So if I let this continue to go, it would discharge this until it reached 3.8 volts per cell on this pack, or up to 16.8 volts on this. All right, I'll go ahead and stop this. I'll show you the final way to discharge. So now we can unplug our battery, unplug this main one, get out of the way. Now we can use it's called external discharge function. We will hook up our battery here. And so we talked about earlier about the charger's internal capability of discharging through heat is limited to about 35 watts. But if you have another source of essentially a resistive load, you can discharge into that. So what I have here is a resistive load. The recommendation, it can be anything with a 1.5 to 2.5 ohm resistance. This is a 20 volt, 150 watt projector battery, or projector lamp. And so with this, this is a resistive load, and I can go ahead and plug this into the output connector, and then go to the function called external discharge. And so right now, I can change the current setting. So this is, maybe even be a little higher You have to be careful. These, any kind of resistive discharge gets hot. So normally if I run this for a long time, I would put it on, like a little metal plate or something like that, because it does get warm. But essentially, you can discharge to an external. You can see here, right now, this is discharging at 125 watts. That's 100, and I don't like to run it quite at 150 because there's no fan cooling it. But essentially, get that out of the way here a little bit, but essentially you can see here that that's discharging at almost 8 amps here and at 125 watts. And you can change that. You say, oh, that's too much. I want to decrease that. I can decrease it all the way down to an amp. And you can see here that the light bulb is now very dim. So that is the external discharge function. And so that pretty much covers all the different discharge capabilities of this charger, which having all three of those is pretty impressive. All right, lastly, let's talk about some of the special functions. So if you go into the select task, you'll notice one up here that we haven't talked about yet, and that's power supply. So essentially, you can turn this charger into an adjustable power supply of using any size battery. So right now, let me go ahead and hook up a digital voltmeter. All right, so you can adjust this wherever you want. So you can adjust the output voltage and the output power. So let's say that I got it set up to 15 volts. I can even make it higher than that. So I can make this, this is only, this is a 4S pack, so the maximum voltage that can come out of this is 16.8. But let's say I want 24 volts. So this has a step up transformer inside it to be able to output more than its supply voltage. So we'll start the task. And here is outputting 24 volts, pretty much right on the money. And of course, there's no current on it right now because it's set to 700 watts, but this doesn't draw any current. But you can use this to supply voltage, to whatever you want. So I can go ahead and change that output here. Let's say I want to go all. Let's see how far down it goes. It goes down to 5 volts. There we are, 5 volts. That's a very handy feature. This is one of the first chargers I've seen with the AC power. Of course, I'm powering with DC, but with the AC power that has this capability. So we can go ahead and stop that. Well, I should also show real quick, anywhere from 700 watts, if you want to limit the amount of wattage that you put to it, it goes all the way down to 20 watts. And that would limit the amount of wattage. So you wouldn't, if you had something if you thought might be a good idea to limit the wattage on, you can do that here as well. All right, we'll go ahead and stop that. All right, next we have the servo functions. So remember at the very beginning, we looked at this little multi-function port back here. And this is where you can hook up a servo and do servo testing. So on a servo lead, the orange wire here, that's the signal, and the darker wire, that's the ground. So you just plug it in like this. Long press on the button. Go down to Tools. All right, here we have the servo test. I'll go ahead and select the servo auto test. And you can see here that it's essentially moving the servo back and forth, and I can change the speed here. So there's mid speed, high speed, and you can test out your servos. You can also change how far it moves it. So you can move it a greater sweep. All right, so if you long press on this, take you back out. There's also a manual test, which you can increase essentially the same parameters manually. Long press to get back out of there. And so the other functions it has here is pulse width modulated measurement. So what you would do here, if you hooked up a receiver with pulse width modulated output, you could have it measure that here. I'm not going to hook one up, but that's essentially how it works. Is you can measure the output from the receiver here on the screen. And then if we long press here, the last one is PPM out. So essentially you can dial in each channel here, again hooking up, if you want to hook up a flight controller here and simulate a PPM output, and then you can change each one of these values to whatever you want. You can go down through here and make them exactly what you want. And essentially that PPM output could go to a flight controller or anything else that would receive a PPM output. All right, so long press to get out of this. Go back. And then one other thing I will point out, you can calibrate this. So essentially what you do for calibration, well, we can hook it up to the main power lead here. What you do for calibration is you go ahead and measure, if you want to check the calibration, you go ahead and measure the output voltage of each cell, with a digital voltmeter or something, write that down, and then you would plug it in. You plug in that battery after you measured it, and then you go into the calibration, long press, calibration. So what you would go ahead and do is type in this long number. I went ahead and did that. They just got a long number there to make sure that you don't accidentally type it in and get into calibration when you don't want to. And so go ahead and get in there. And then what you would do is you could change each one of these if they were if it was reading a little bit wrong based on what you measured with your voltmeter. You could change each one of these to make it line up right. So let's say I want to change that top one and change it to 4.3 or 4.039 instead of 4.037. But this one's already calibrated. All these are calibrated from the factory, so you wouldn't normally have to do this, but you can do it if you want to. So you can also recalibrate the input voltage and the output voltage. So go back, and that's calibration. And there is a couple functions down here. They do have a system self-checking. They don't want you to have a battery connected. No problems. And then you have factory settings. You can reset the factory defaults. System information. Hardware and firmware and serial number. And that is it. Now we're back out to the main menu. So with that, we reviewed all the functions of the Hobbymate Speed H6 AC/DC Smart Charger. So that'll wrap up this video. Thank you.